Good morning, everybody. Welcome to this edition of Quarantine Collections. My name is Travis Gilbert. I'm the Educator and Collections Coordinator here at the Old Baldy Foundation. We hope that you and your family are safe, that you all are healthy, and that you're trying to get through this quarantine, this mess, by self-isolating and keeping yourselves busy. During this very serious time, we're hoping that these videos provide a little bit of levity to the situation, a little bit of entertainment, a little bit of education, just trying to do what we can on this side to help you folks get through this and to bring a little bit of Bald Head Island to you wherever this quarantine finds you. Today, or this morning, I wanted to talk about what we call the Cape Fear Life Saving Service property returns. So you can imagine any government service, whether it be the life-saving service or eventually the Coast Guard here on Bald Head Island, or the lighthouse service. Many of the items, the equipment, the materials at those stations are government property. The keepers, the life-saving servicemen known as surfmen, they don't own these materials. It's government property. It's taxpayer funded. So anytime that there was a change in administration, perhaps a new keeper was coming to the station, or perhaps the officer in charge had passed away or was being relocated to another station, the individuals at that station, whether it be the life-saving service or the lighthouse service, they would have to do an inventory. They would have to catalog what equipment that was government owned was at the station to make sure that nobody was embezzling the government property, to make sure that the station was properly equipped, etc. So here in the archives at the Old Baldy Foundation, we have several examples of these property returns, these inventories of government property at the life-saving service stations or the lighthouse stations. And I thought that I would pull one out here for the life-saving service. You can see here that it was for Cape Fear Station, and it was finished in May of 1911. That's a significant date because in 1911, the keeper or the officer at the life-saving service station passed away just a few months after this property return was completed. And that keeper was John L. Watts. He had served as keeper for many, many years. He was the second keeper at Cape Fear Life-Saving Service Station. And he passed away that autumn from a heart attack. He was on the job. He had the heart attack here on Bald Head Island and passed away on the island, but he was not actively involved in a rescue at the time of his passing. So this property return, which we imagine is in his writing, in his words, was completed just a few months before he passed away. And there was a gentleman, the last name of Price, that took his position temporarily as keeper at Cape Fear Station, and eventually a permanent keeper by the name of Samuel Brinkman was placed in charge at Cape Fear Life-Saving Service Station. And if you recall, this station was located on East Beach, just north of the modern-day Shoals Club, and it was in operation out there from about 1882, 1883 until 1915, when Congress consolidates different branches of the government related to the ocean, such as the Revenue Cutter Service and the Life-Saving Service, in order to create the modern Coast Guard as we know it today. And at the same time the Coast Guard was established in 1915, the government decommissioned that station on East Beach, and they opened up a brand new station located on South Beach that would officially become known as the Cape Fear Coast Guard Station. So when you opened this book up, first of all, these books were fill in the blanks. So you can notice that and I washed my hands. It's perfect. We don't handle these papers with gloves, even in the situation we find ourselves in, where the gloves are way more important at medical facilities rather than here in our archives. But we just make sure we wash our hands, so rid ourselves of the oil on our hands that would damage these papers. So I thoroughly washed my hands just a few minutes ago. You can see it is a fill in the blank there. These forms were sent out. You can see this form on the cover was completed in 1832, but it's not completed until 1911, so 80-some years after the form was completed. So each station would have several of these forms on hand. When the time came to complete a property return or an inventory of the government's equipment located at that station, it was just a quick fill in the blanks. And this actually has 5 of the same form in this bound booklet. 5 forms. 1 is fully completed and 1 is only partially completed. 3 of the 5 forms in here are uncompleted. They're just empty. So if you're out there listening, we have quite a few listeners. Give us a shout out in the comments. Let us know where you're listening from. Let us know what your connection is to Bald Head Island. I'm going to be following along here on my phone, and we love to interact with y'all out there. If you have any questions for us, give those questions. Write them down in the comments, and we'll do our best to answer those questions or find an answer for you. I'm just going to bring this up here. We've been having a lot of fun with these videos, and we have a full week next week planned for you all, keep you entertained and to keep you educated while we're all in this mess. Mackie, I'm here at home in Wilmington. Mackie, I'm really beginning to miss you, and some of our other volunteers like Phil. It's been a while since we've seen you all. Mackie, I got your email. I'm so glad that you got to go out and get some fresh air. I think they look like dogwoods that were blooming and some azaleas. Bald Head Island is a beautiful place to be self-isolating. But I'm missing all the azaleas and all the dogwoods in Wilmington are blooming, and I'm going to miss it all this year. I can only imagine my garden at home must just be in full bloom, and I'm going to miss it this year. But it's okay. Bald Head Island's equally as beautiful for different reasons. So I'm glad you are out there enjoying all those blossoms. So when we open this form up, it's each equipment is listed. We call them articles in this form. And the articles are listed in alphabetical order. So for example, on the first page, we have anchors, we have axes. And not only are they fill in the blanks listed here what you should have in type, John L. Watts at the bottom is also listing some items that were not already pre-established in this form. So whereas anchor and axes is typed in there on the government form, he is also adding acid nitrate. He's adding books, civic service rules. So clearly there are other items that they have at the station that the government is not already pre-establishing on here. Now I'm just going to go through, and there's some interesting tidbits or details that we can read in this form that help illuminate or help describe what their lives were like here at Cape Fear Life Saving Service Station. And the first detail is that they had key posts. Key posts, that's a road on Bald Head Island out there at Cape Fear Station. So there was a lookout tower built onto the roof of their station along East Beach. So during their service, somebody would have been up there on that lookout tower on the roof of the station watching out over the shoals. Additionally, there would have been a task where 2 life-saving servicemen would have left the station. One would have made a left and gone on the beach walking along. The other life-saving servicemen, or surfmen as we called them, would have hung a right when they left the station, and they would follow that beach strand. And they would go roughly 3 miles along the beach, looking out over the surf to make sure that nobody was in distress. And once they reached what we call a key post, they would have turned around and walked that same beach strand the whole way back to the station where they would have been relieved of their duty. Well, where they would have turned around was this piece of equipment called a key post. How did the keeper, the officer in charge, know that life-saving serviceman actually went 3 miles along the beach? They could have been playing hooky. They could have gone, out of eyesight, sat down on the beach, took a nap, maybe read a little bit, wrote. How could they prove that they actually traveled that far? Well, this key post had 2 features. Man, all the phones are ringing this morning. And unfortunately, they're all scams. The scams are through the roof here. Be careful out there, folks. A lot of bad people are taking opportunity of this situation. So be careful with those emails and those phone calls. Anyway, at this key post, there could have been 2 features. Up in the Outer Banks, these life-saving service stations were placed so far apart that rather than 2 men leaving the station, one life-saving serviceman would have walked down the beach where they would have met a counterpart from that next station. So let's say there were 2 stations on Bald Head Island. A surfman would have left each of those stations, walking in the direction of the other station. They would have met halfway in between, and they would have exchanged a token, a little badge. I'll put in the comments an example of one of those badges. You can find them up in the Outer Banks at various gift shops, little reproductions. So their counterparts, they would have received the badge from the opposite station. They would have turned around and gone back to their respected station, and that would have proved that they walked that far. Now here on Bald Head Island, we only had 1 station, so there wasn't a counterpart. There wasn't another station to walk towards. So rather than exchanging badges, at this key post, they basically would have been punching like a time card. So just like in the olden days, we do it all electronically now, but you would have shown up to the job and you would have put your punch card in, and there would have been a time stamp, and that's how you proved that you clocked in at 9:30 and you left at 5. Well, here at this key post, they would take their little time card, and at that key post, they would basically have a time stamp, something very, very similar. That key post, they would have had a stamp that proved that they walked that 3 miles. They would turn around and return to Cape Fear Life Saving Service Station and show the keeper or the officer in charge, hey, I walked this far. I walked my 3 miles. I turned around, walked that 3 miles back, all the time looking out onto the horizon, out onto the surf to make sure nobody's watching. So how do we know that this occurred here at Bald Head Island at Cape Fear Life Saving Service Station? Well, here in this property return, they are noticing, or they log, that there were 3 key posts. And in this description, it says state the directions and the distance from the station. And John L. Watts is writing that there was one northeast 3 1/4 mile from station, and there was one southwest by west 3 1/4 miles from the station. So that means that you had 2 surfmen leaving Cape Fear Life Saving Service Station along East Beach. One was hanging a left and walking up East Beach towards the aquarium at Fort Fisher, past Middle Island, past Bluff Island, walking 3 1/4 mile towards Fort Fisher, where that key post would have been. They would have got their timestamp, their punch mark. They would have turned around and followed that 3 1/4 mile back down along East Beach to the station. Whereas their counterpart, the other man, would have been leaving that station, hanging a right, going down to East Beach, around the Cape, and back up South Beach, 3 1/4 mile. When you do the calculations, that would have brought them past Killigray, past Forest Buff, past the Baldy Island Club, almost to the river, to the bar of the river where the Cape Fear River is dumping out into the Atlantic Ocean. That's where their key post was. They would have got their timestamp. That proved that they had walked that far around the Cape and up South Beach. They would have turned around, returned to the station. So this property return highlights or sheds some light, some details on how they operated these roles when they were walking up and down the beaches. Some other details that this really shows is that they had a cookhouse, they had a stable. It's showing us that when each of these houses were built, so if the station was finished around 1882, 1883, the cookhouse wasn't built until 1893. This would have been a detached kitchen. We know that the stable was built in 1908. Why would they need a stable? Well, remember when we were talking about the Lyle gun and the beach apparatus cart? Any piece of equipment these surfmen needed to rescue stranded mariners out on the shoals, it was placed on a cart with 2 wheels. So before 1908, the men would have been pulling this cart. The men were the horses or the mules. And clearly around 1908, they're getting an animal, a horse, a mule of some sort, and that horse would have been used to pull that cart up and down the beach. Would have given a nice little break for these surfmen not pulling a cart up and down the beach. Another detail that's very important, anytime there was a rescue performed, and we're aware of 54 rescues based at a Cape Fear Life-Saving Service station, they would have created a report. And I mean they, the keeper, the officer in charge, would have written a report that would have been sent to his superiors. We have one of the rec reports for Cape Fear Life-Saving Service station. Right now it's on loan to the state of North Carolina. It is currently at the North Carolina Maritime Museum in Southport, where I know they're taking very good care of it. But that is the only rec report that we're aware of. It was transcribed by one of our board members, Kim Gottshaw. So what happened to the other rec reports? Because John L. Watts is listing 3. We're only aware of 1. So that's why I'm very conscious when I'm giving a tour, we're discussing, I say that we're aware at a minimum of 54 shipwrecks. There are gaps, there are time gaps in that rec report that we're aware of. And clearly there were 3 rec report logs that John L. Watts is listing in 1911. So that means if we're aware of 1 of the 3, there's got to be some rec reports in those other 2 log books that John L. Watts is listing that we are not aware of. Wouldn't we love to know what those log books are listing, what wrecks they're detailing that we are just not aware of and have been lost, unfortunately, to history. Hey, we got quite a few listeners. People are coming and going. Give us a shout out there in the comments. We'd love to know where you're listening from, what your connection is to Bald Head Island. And if y'all have any questions about the life-saving service or that Cape Fear Life-Saving Service station located on South Beach. We are very fortunate to have many artifacts in our collections that were used at the Cape Fear Life Saving Service Station. We have a Lyle gun, we have semaphore flags, we have buttons and pins, we have property returns, and they are all donated in the early 2000s by a gentleman up in Wilmington who had quite a private personal collection related to the station. So in this property return, they're listing many of the artifacts that we now own. That's what's so awesome about this. We know here that they had 2 Lyle guns, these small cannons that were used to fire a cannonball with a rope attached to reach the wrecked vessel out on the shoal. That would secure a rope or several ropes between the wrecked vessel on the shoals and the shoreline, where they would attach a pulley on that rope with a breeches buoy attached. A breeches buoy is that typical life preserver, that donut-shaped cork-filled life preserver we're all familiar with, except this one has a pair of pants sewed into the hole. So the idea was that the pulley would be sent out the rope to the wrecked vessel. Some brave soul would be the first person to climb in the buoy and put the pair of pants on, because they would be ziplining back and forth until everybody was saved. Well, we know that at this station there were 2 Lyle guns. We have one in our collection. I'm going to show you here at the very end. Where was the other one? Not quite sure. Fred, joined late, so sorry if I already covered. What was located on Sea Lavender? Yeah, next week we're going to be going live to Sea Lavender. That is the circa 1915 station that was the second life-saving service station or Coast Guard station established on Bald Head Island. In the year 1911, when John L. Watts is completing this report, they are still at a station that was lost to history, located on East Beach, just north of the Bald Head Island Club. The house on Sea Lavender, that is the boathouse of the second station that was constructed after the station we are speaking of in this broadcast was destroyed or it was decommissioned. So that's a really great question, Fred. A lot of folks get confused between the two. And there's been this long discussion we were kind of talking about a little bit last night. In terms of the Generator Society, anybody that was here in the 70s or 80s, the boathouse, when they say the boathouse, they mean that house on Sea Lavender Court. Whereas in the 21st century, when you say the boathouse, most people are thinking about the boathouse that's in the saltwater marsh that was unfortunately destroyed during Hurricane Florence in 2018. So lots of different terms, lots of nomenclature that overlaps, and depending on who you are and when you were on Bald Head Island and what your experiences are, they have overlapping meanings and overlapping terms. There are synonyms. A boathouse could be the boathouse on East Beach, the boathouse on South Beach, or the boathouse in the marsh. All depends who you are and what your experiences are on what you mean by the boathouse. It's kind of like Bald Head Island, Smith Island, Palmetto Island, Cape Island, Cedar Island. It's all the same island. It all depends who you are and what time period you're experiencing Bald Head Island, in which name you're going to use. Kara, my 6-year-old is becoming quite the history and geography buff. At least it pertains to BHI. Thanks again for creating these videos every day. Hey, Kara, it is our pleasure. It's been quite the experience reviewing all the material and going into detail with some of these primary sources. So we're learning just as much as you are by reviewing the material, and we're very happy. It's our pleasure to be providing some of these videos. I'm glad you're sharing those with your 6-year-old. So what other equipment is John L. Watts listing here in this property return? Flags, district flags or flying flags, anything from envelopes. They had 252 envelopes at Cape Fear Life Saving Service Station in 1911. Draft animals, clearly here, they received a horse on October 21st, 1909. So again, rather than men pulling that cart out onto East Beach, a horse is now pulling that cart, at least after around Halloween in 1909. Hammers and haversacks, cans of oil. We know that they had 60 gallons of oil to fuel all their lamps in 1911. Chisels and compasses, cups and desks. They at least had one desk. Bunting. Perhaps they were decorating for the 4th of July. Blankets. 25 blankets. That would have been very important, you think, when they rescued these folks from the stranded vessel out on the shoals. They very quickly had to get them back to the station in order to warm them up. So there would have been plenty of blankets located at the station, so these shipwreck survivors could be comforted once they return to the station. So we talked about these men going up and down the beaches, going to that key post, getting their time, their punch, and returning back to where they came from. What happens when they see a distressed vessel on their beat, on their walk along the shoreline? Well, they had these Coston flares, and clearly they had right here Coston flares. They had 282 Coston flares located at the station in 1911. And these flares would have been employed. You never would have left your station without a Coston flare. When they saw a distressed vessel out in the ocean, immediately they would have lit one of those flares, a bright red flare. And that would have communicated to the distressed vessel out on the shoals, hey, we see you. We see you, and we're coming up with a plan. Then they would have probably not walked, but raced back to the station in order to communicate to their keeper, the officer in charge, there's a distressed vessel out there. What is our game plan? Because again, they could either employ the Lyle gun and do that zip lining on the breeches buoy, or plan B, they could go out with their surf boats and row manually to that distressed vessel, rescue everyone on the surf boat, and return back. Life belts, cork. Everything is made out of cork. They had 38 life preservers made out of cork located at the station. Lyle gun projectiles. They had 23 projectiles. Now, the cannonball that they're firing from this Lyle gun in order to deliver that life-saving line or rope to the wrecked vessel out on the shoals or in the ocean, it didn't look like a cannonball. It actually kind of looked like a cylinder. It was a cylinder shape. It weighed roughly 17 pounds, and it had an eye hook on the end of that cylinder. And the eye hook is where they would have tied the rope, fired that 17-pound cylinder projectile out to the shipwreck, and they would have untied the rope from the eye hook, the distressed mariners at least, and retied it to one of the parts of the ship sticking out of the water. So we know that they had 23 of those projectiles at the station in 1911. Fortunately, Jeff Kinney, who is one of our supporters out there, he might be listening. I know he was listening to some of the videos, not necessarily live, but in the future. We believe that he found one of those Lyle gun projectiles. Many times when we find artifacts here on Baldy Island, they're corroded, meaning that after years of being in the sand or in a saltwater environment, it's going to have all kinds of gunk on it. And it takes a process called electrolysis to remove that gunk, and it takes a very long time for that to occur. So we believe that we have one of those 17-pound cylinder projectiles, perhaps one that John L. Watts is listing here in his property returns, but it's going to take a little while to get that projectile decorroded so we can display it. So to be continued on that. What kind of oars are they using to row out if they're going to employ their surf boat? Well, we have 15, 12-foot, 14-foot, 17-foot oars, 20-foot oars. These are some pretty massive oars, folks. And the most they had was 31 12-foot oars. Think that's a lot of manpower just to get that surf boat out over the surf, let alone miles upon miles. The medicine chest is one of my favorites. What do these folks do when they get sick on Baldy Island? It's not like they have a maritime market to go get some Tylenol at. So what are they listening in their medicine chest? Ammonia, brandy, bandages, lint, sponges, pins, snuff, salts, wadding, whiskey, wine, and sherry. Wine, whiskey, and brandy. I'm thinking that there were a lot of people on the sick roll at Cape Fear Life Saving Service Station. I jest. That's maybe a bad taste of joke, but it doesn't look like they were in too terrible hands if they were on the sick roll at the Life Saving Service Station. So I'm just kind of reviewing here to make sure there's nothing else here that I want to bring up. I don't think so. I think that we've kind of covered a little bit of everything. I wanted to show you all the lifeboats. I thought that that would be really important. They had different types of boats. They had lifeboats, and they had supply boats, and they had surf boats. So they had a supply boat. It was called a Jersey boat, and that is what they're using to get back and forth from Southport. And then they had a surf boat. It was called a McClellan surf boat, and they received a self-bailing McClellan surf boat in 1903. There are models of these surf boats, of the McClellan self-bailing surf boat, out at the Shoals Club today. And self-bailing means that in case it turned over, if they're trying to get up over a wave and it turned over, it was self-bailing. It would right itself rather than having to do that manually. I remember back in Boy Scouts, one of the first things you had to do when you were kayaking or canoeing to earn the badges, you had to figure out how to get that kayak turned correctly in the water when it was full of water in case you had accidentally flipped it. They would have been training to do that out there at Cape Fear Life Saving Service Station, but in 1903, they got a boat that did it itself. The supply boat, the Jersey supply boat, it's an interesting point. We were discussing this last night. The old boathouse, and boathouse I mean the one in the saltwater marsh, that is how they're coming and going from Southport into Bald Head Island. That boathouse was constructed for the Life Saving Service Station and for later the Coast Guard Station. It was not a product or an appropriation of the lighthouse service. Although the lighthouse keepers and the assistant keepers definitely used that resource here on Bald Head Island. But it was appropriated specifically for the Life Saving Service and eventually the Coast Guard Station. All right. It had 2 breeches buoys. I could go on and on and on. It's a great resource, a great primary resource. Again, this is how historians, this is how we uncover the equipment, the lifestyle of men that lived here over 100 years ago. We're using primary sources written firsthand in the hands of the men that were serving out here over 100 years ago. And something as mundane as an inventory of supplies can tell us so much about their activities out here in the early 20th century. So we're very fortunate to have this property returned. I skipped over a lot of things, so maybe we'll revisit these property returns. I know next week I would like to show you all or share with you all a property return that was completed by Captain Charlie for the lighthouse service. Again, it kind of illuminates some aspects of their lifestyle out here in the early 20th century. Melanie checking in from Apex, North Carolina, a bit late. Good morning. Good morning to you, Melanie. You're never late in terms of us. You can always go back and rewind these videos to see what you've missed. We're just happy that you're joining us. And Melanie, we're hoping that everybody is safe and healthy in your family. So I know I'm going a little over time here. I wanted to show you some things that we talked about here in this report. This is what the Lyle gun looks like. That is our Lyle gun. It was used at Cape Fear Life Saving Service Station. That is the small cannon that they're putting on that cart that was, after 1909, clearly pulled by a horse. That is what is firing that 17-pound cylinder projectile that is delivering the life-saving rope to the distressed mariners out at sea. If you go up to a place called Chickamaucomico, it's just north of Cape Hatteras, you can actually see a reproduction Lyle gun being fired. They do some really great interactive living history up there. They do it on Thursdays at Chickamaucomico Life Saving Service Museum, because on Thursdays, that is when all these surfmen and their keeper would have practiced the Lyle gun or the breeches buoy drill. Every day of the week, they had a different drill that they were practicing, a different chore to be completed. And that is our Lyle gun for the Life Saving Service Station. I also was kidding. Hey, I think we all need to smile a little bit. Oh, look! This is our shop dog, Finn. Hey girl. Hey, look at the camera here. That will hopefully put a little smile on everybody's face. We love Finn. She brings us smiles when we need them the most in these times. That is Jess's dog, who runs our retail operations. So hopefully that put a little smile on y'all's faces out there. So hey, thank you for joining us for that morning edition of Quarantine Collections. This afternoon, we're going to be talking about one of my favorite stories to share. It's pirates. I'm wearing my Blackbeard hat for you all. We're going to be bringing you live to the Cape Fear River to tell you the story of the Battle of the Sandbars. You are not going to want to miss the penultimate pirate story for the lower Cape Fear region. So make sure you tune in at 2 o'clock this afternoon right here on our Facebook page. Remember, if you missed a video, you want to go back and see something that we broadcasted earlier this week or last week, you can find these videos here on our Facebook page. You can go to the Instagram TV, which is on our Instagram page. They're just telling me to announce these things. I don't even know what I'm talking about. I am not a millennial when it comes to technology. And also, you can go to our YouTube channel. And when you go to our YouTube channel to watch these videos, click subscribe. That'll help us out. That'll increase our social media presence. Check out our brand new website, oldbaldy.org. Our brand new website went live yesterday. Abby Overton, our special events and marketing coordinator, has been working very hard to bring you a very aesthetically pleasing, informative new website. And what is really awesome about that new website is we are now launching a virtual store. So you might not be able to come into our gift shop and browse around for hats or shirts or books, but now you can go to oldbaldy.org, click shop on the main menu, and you can see a sampling of what we have to offer. Jess Woodard, who runs our retail operations, she will get you anything you want shipped any day but Sunday. If you get to her, email her, or go to our website before 3 o'clock, she'll even get it the same day shipping. So on that note, folks, thank you for joining us this morning. We will all see you this afternoon at 2 o'clock for the Battle of the Sandbars. We hope that you and your family are healthy. We hope that you all are safe and that you're trying to get through this the best that you can. I know we are too, just trying to keep busy, trying to continually wash our hands. So take care, folks, and we'll see y'all later.